There was a garden behind Ethan Cole's house that had been waiting for him for almost 3 years. Every spring, he stood at the edge of it and imagined what it could become: rows of tomatoes, fresh herbs, fruit trees, a small wooden table where people could sit in the evening. There was only one problem: the garden was still mostly dirt, and every year Ethan had the same explanation: he would start next weekend. Ethan was 27 and lived in a small American town where most people knew each other by name. He worked weekdays at a hardware store. It wasn't his dream job, but Ethan was always talking about what came next. He wanted his own landscaping business. He wanted financial freedom. He wanted a house with a workshop. 3 years earlier, Ethan had bought lumber, soil, tools, and dozens of seed packets. He had drawn a beautiful plan on paper: 6 raised beds, a small greenhouse, a compost area, a wooden bench beneath the old maple tree. He even wrote a name across the top of the plan: Cole Family Garden, but the plan stayed in a drawer. Then there was the garden. 3 years earlier, Ethan had bought lumber, soil, tools, and dozens of seed packets. He had drawn a beautiful plan on paper, but the plan stayed in a drawer. The lumber remained stacked against the garage, and the empty ground slowly became covered with weeds. Still, Ethan talked about it. One evening, while eating dinner with his mother, he described exactly what the garden would look like. Linda listened. Then she asked a simple question: "When are you actually going to build it?" Ethan smiled. "Soon." Linda didn't argue. She just looked toward the window. Outside, the weeds had already reached the bottom of the fence. A few days later, Samuel came by. He had spent most of his life working with his hands. He didn't lecture Ethan. Instead, he walked into the backyard and looked around. He examined the unused lumber, the unopened bags of soil, the tools still sitting in their boxes. Then he noticed the garden plan sticking out from beneath a pile of old magazines. Samuel pulled it out. He studied it for a moment. "Good plan," he said. Ethan smiled proudly. "I told you, once I get started, it'll be incredible." Samuel folded the paper. "That's exactly what worries me." Ethan's smile disappeared. Samuel pointed toward the empty garden. "You've spent 3 years imagining the finished version." He paused. "But you haven't spent 3 mornings building the first part." That sentence stayed with Ethan. But not for long. The next morning, Ethan went back to his usual routine: work, dinner, phone, videos, sleep, and another promise to start tomorrow. Then summer arrived, and Ethan received an opportunity he had been waiting for. A local landscaping company was looking for someone to manage a small new branch. The owner knew Ethan was good with customers, he knew Ethan understood plants, and he knew Ethan had been talking about starting his own company. The position wasn't glamorous. It required long hours, early mornings, and responsibility, but it was exactly the kind of experience Ethan needed. The owner told him, "If you can handle this for a year, you'll be ready to run something yourself." Ethan went home excited. This was it, the first real step toward the life he wanted. He told his mother, he told his friends, he even called Samuel. Everyone was proud of him. But when Monday morning came, Ethan looked at the early alarm on his phone: 5:30 a.m. He stared at it. Then he thought about how tired he was. He told himself he would call the owner after breakfast. After breakfast became lunch. Lunch became evening. By the end of the day, Ethan had convinced himself that he needed more time to think. The following morning, the position was given to someone else. Ethan told everyone it wasn't the right opportunity, but that wasn't the truth. The truth was much harder. He had been afraid of the work. That night, Ethan walked into the backyard. The garden looked worse than he remembered. He picked up the old garden plan. For the first time, the drawing didn't make him excited. It made him embarrassed. Then Samuel appeared behind him. Ethan didn't hear the gate open. Samuel looked at the paper, then at the garden. He didn't say, "I told you so." Instead, he walked toward the old maple tree. Underneath it was a small wooden box. Samuel opened it. Inside were several envelopes. Ethan looked confused. Samuel handed him the oldest one. The envelope had Ethan's name written across it. Inside was a note Ethan had written when he was 22. He had forgotten about it completely. The note said, "I want to build something of my own before I'm 30. I don't want to spend my life saying I'll do it someday."
Ethan stared at the words. 5 years had passed, and somehow, someday was still in control. Samuel finally spoke. "Do you know what kills most dreams?" Ethan shook his head. "Not failure." Samuel looked toward the abandoned garden. "Neglect." That word hit harder than any speech could have. That night, Ethan made a decision. He didn't make a giant 5-year plan. He didn't announce anything online. He didn't tell his friends that his life was about to change. He simply set his alarm for 5:30. The next morning, he got out of bed. He walked into the backyard, and he pulled the first weed, then another, then another. It was uncomfortable. His back hurt. His hands became dirty. After 40 minutes, the garden barely looked different. But Ethan did. The next morning, he returned. Then the next. He learned what he didn't know. He watched tutorials. He asked experienced gardeners questions. He stopped waiting to feel motivated. And slowly, something changed. Not just in the garden, inside him. The first raised bed was finally built. Then the second. The old lumber was repaired. The soil was turned. Seeds went into the ground. Ethan made mistakes. Some plants died. Some plans failed. 1 week, a storm damaged half the garden. For the first time in his life, Ethan didn't use failure as a reason to quit. He simply started repairing things the next morning. Months later, the backyard looked completely different. Green plants filled the raised beds. Herbs grew beside tomatoes. A small wooden bench sat beneath the maple tree. It wasn't the perfect garden Ethan had drawn years earlier. It was better, because this one actually existed. A year later, Ethan still hadn't become rich. He hadn't built his dream house. He hadn't traveled around the world. But something more important had happened. He had started. The garden began supplying fresh herbs and vegetables to a nearby cafe. That small relationship became another opportunity. Then another. Ethan slowly began taking weekend landscaping jobs. Eventually, he reduced his hours at the hardware store, not because he had suddenly become lucky, because he had finally become consistent. One evening, Ethan sat beneath the maple tree. His mother placed a cup of coffee beside him. Samuel stood near the garden gate. Ethan looked across the rows of plants. Then he noticed something. There were still weeds. Even after all that work, weeds were still growing. Ethan smiled. He finally understood that this was the point. Laziness doesn't disappear forever. Distractions don't disappear forever. Fear doesn't disappear forever. You simply stop allowing them to run your life. Ethan's biggest mistake had never been dreaming too much. It had been believing that someday he would magically become the person capable of achieving those dreams. He wouldn't. Nobody does. You become that person through small choices repeated so many times that eventually they become part of who you are. So if you're listening to this while thinking about something you've been postponing, remember Ethan's garden. You don't need to change your entire life tonight. You don't need perfect motivation. You don't need to know exactly how everything will end. You just need to do something today that your future self will be grateful you started. Pull one weed, plant one seed, make one phone call, write one page, take one step. Because dreams don't usually disappear in one dramatic moment. They disappear quietly, one tomorrow at a time. And sometimes, the most important day of your life isn't the day everything finally works out. It's the ordinary day when you stop promising yourself that you'll begin, and finally begin.